Stephen Mosley.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I too stand to welcome and warmly approve of this bill that we have before us today. I think that the whole country was shocked by the findings of the Hillsborough Independent Panel. In subsequent statements and debates in this House, it has become obvious that there is a huge groundswell of parliamentary opinion that swift action needs to be taken to achieve swift justice for the 96. Outside this debate, the Attorney-General is doing absolutely the right thing in pushing for an early referral to the High Court and for them to make a speedy decision on the validity of the original inquests. And the Home Secretary has also done absolutely the right thing by calling for the IPCC to investigate the actions of the police, both on the day of Hillsborough and their subsequent involvement in any form of cover-up. The Home Secretary promised that the IPCC would be given the powers and the resources they need to pursue this investigation, and that is what this bill delivers. So I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for the speed in which she has brought this bill forward. The families of the Hillsborough victims and also the survivors themselves are understandably looking for swift justice. And given that the IPCC intends to begin calling witnesses to their investigation at the beginning of next year, the sooner that they are in possession of the necessary tools, the better. It is important also to say that as with all the progress that has been made over Hillsborough since 2010, I'm delighted that this bill does have cross-party support here today. I know that the Shadow Home Secretary spoke in favour of fast-track legislation during the bill's first reading a fortnight ago, and the opposition MPs have been a great help in advancing this bill. Now, as we've heard... Of course I give way.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I agree wholeheartedly with every single word he says. Would he agree with me that if it was possible to dedicate legislation, that we would all like to dedicate this legislation to the families of those who lost loved ones on that day?
I would agree with that entirely. Knowing families of people who lived in Chester who sadly died on that day, 23 years later, it still affects them on a daily basis. It is up to us in this House to make sure that we achieve a swift resolution for them. That's what we're trying to do. It's what we've been trying to do since the Right Honourable Member for Lee started the independent panel 2-3 years ago now, and absolutely everything we do to make sure that we get justice for all 96 and all survivors. Now, the bill that we've got before us today, as we've heard, contains two main clauses and has two main functions. I'm going to look at it backwards and consider Clause 2 first, which allows the IPCC to launch investigations into incidents that happened before the Commission was established in 2004 and into incidents that had been previously investigated by its predecessor authority, the Police Complaints Authority. This bill essentially makes it possible for the IPC to investigate police actions at Hillsborough 23 years ago, and I'm totally in support of that clause. The bill also compels serving police officers to attend hearings as witnesses, a power which has not been previously available to the IPCC. And it's important to note that whilst this bill has been brought forward specifically because of Hillsborough, I think that most of us would agree that the power to call police officers as witnesses should be a tool which is regularly at the disposal of the IPCC. So I'm therefore very pleased that this bill is not set to expire and that the powers conferred on the Commission will be retained for future IPCC investigations. I have noticed, like the Shadow Policing Minister, that the Police Federation have expressed some concerns, especially about the clause that requires police officers to attend an interview. I've read something from Steve Evans, who leads for the Police Federation on professional standards, and he's said and raised a valid concern that police officers are going to be treated differently from any other section of society, and I'm not quite sure what the Home Secretary is hoping to achieve. In response to that specific point, I do think that police officers should indeed be treated differently to other sections of society, by virtue of the fact that they are the ones who are entrusted to administer the law, and they must be accountable for their actions, and they must not be able to shy away from any form of investigation. Additionally, Mr Evans has gone on to argue, or has gone on to say, I would like to know what the problem is that needs fixing, as well as the evidence which suggests that officers do not comply with the current system. Now, we've referred to the IPCC briefing before, and that helps us when we're responding to Mr Evans's concerns, because the IPC briefing paper we've received says, though we do not keep specific records of instances of non-cooperation, we have readily been able to identify at least 25 cases involving over 100 police officers where there has been a refusal to attend for interview. These cases cover such serious matters as death or serious injury, police shootings, road traffic incidents and the use of excessive force. Indeed, a recent case in point is the case of the shooting of Mark Duggan in Tottenham last year that contributed towards the escalation of violence in the area and led eventually to riots across the country. As part of the IPCC's investigation into the incident, the police marksman who shot Mr Duggan, as well as 30 other officers, all refused to be interviewed by the Commission. As a result of the legislation currently in place, the Commission were unable to assist on attendance. So regardless of the specific need to expedite investigations into Hillsborough, Mr Deputy Speaker, Mr Duggan's case alone highlights a need for a wider change in the legislation. And whilst I am totally supportive of this bill and wish it every speed and every success in its passage through Parliament today, there are a couple of areas where I do think there are some question marks that need to be answered. The first, as we've heard previously, is that the bill does not compel ex-police officers or ex-police staff to attend interviews as witnesses. Hillsborough was 23 years ago, and many of the officers involved will no longer be serving. I know that the Home Secretary is aware of this and has considered this problem. On the 22nd of October, during the debate on the Hillsborough Independent Panel's report, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, said, "The Government is already looking at what additional powers the IPCC will need, which includes proposals to require current and ex-police officers who may be witness to a crime to attend an interview." Now, I myself would like to see the IPCC given the power to call former officers to give evidence. However, I do appreciate that this may well be very difficult legislation to enact, and that this emergency bill is probably not the right place for this new power to be included. I also note that the Commission themselves have discussed this and decided that the requirement for former officers would be unenforceable and that there would be little value in adding it to the bill. There is, however, one area that I would like to see tightened, and I and others have submitted a probing amendment to the committee stage of the bill to explore this further. Basically, this concern and the tabled amendment is with regard, as we've heard before, to the sanctions for non-attendance at interviews. As the bill currently stands, sanctions for non-compliance will be dealt with by the relevant authority tasked with dealing with misconduct against the officer in question. However, whether non-attendance of the officers is to be determined as misconduct is also left to the discretion of that relevant authority. The IPCC themselves have stated that refusal to attend an interview should be immediately categorised as misconduct and that appropriate disciplinary action should be instantly triggered. I have a large degree of sympathy with that proposal, and therefore I do implore the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister to consider adopting the amendment laid by myself and other honourable members from across the House. This amendment will allow the Home Secretary to ensure that clear, unambiguous and consistent sanctions can be implemented across the country. Finally, Mr Speaker, although this is set in the context of an extremely tragic matter, in my 2.5 years as a member of the House, the issue of Hillsborough has consistently brought out the very best of this Parliament, and for as long as that is necessary, I do hope that that continues.
Order. I gave some leeway there.